While it seems that the Jack the Ripper case attracts the focus of unresolved crimes, there are still some mysterious murders that have withstood the test of time, and in recent years have gained a reputation for their rarity as much as for their blood spilled. One of those mysteries comes from the majestic alpine forests of the German state of Bavaria. The landscape of mountains and idyllic nature makes it seem an unusual place for violent murder. However, in 1922 a quiet farm with the name of Hinterkaifeck was the scene of one of the most brutal, mysterious, and disconcerting murders in German history. Hinterkaifeck was a farm located in the Grobern forest, between the Bavarian cities of Ingolstadt and Schrabenhausen, an hour's drive from Munich. The farm was occupied by a family called the Grubers. The family was composed of the patriarch Andreas, his wife Casilia, his daughter, a woman and widow named Victoria, and their two grandchildren Casilia, 7 years, and Joseph, 2 years. They lived in relative isolation. Their farm was isolated in a forest 1 kilometer from the main town of Kaifeck. Despite the isolation of his farm, the family was quite well known in the area, although not for the best reasons. Andreas Gruber was known as a hostile loner who beat his wife on a regular basis and was not much loved by the people of the city. It was also rumored that the youngest grandson, the 2-year-old Joseph, was the result of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter Victoria. Andreas was said to be so obsessed and in love with Victoria that he had actively forbidden her to marry again and kept her under his strict control. In addition to mistreating his wife, Andreas was also known to be brutally abusive to his own children, of whom Victoria was the only survivor. In general, the family was sullen. The only member of the family who had a relatively good reputation in the city was Victoria, who had a very beautiful voice and sang in the church choir. The mystery of the farm began when the maid suddenly gave up her job and left immediately. When asked why she had left so precipitously, Maria explained that she had been hearing strange voices and other noises around the house, as well as the sound of disembodied steps emanating from the attic. The maid in terror was convinced that the house was haunted and did not want to stay there for a moment longer. She was very pale and emaciated when she left. After their departure, the Grubers attributed the poor woman to suffer some mental disorder. 6 months later, things got weirder, when in mid-March 1922, Andreas was inspecting his property after a snowstorm and discovered some strange footprints in the snow that came out of the surrounding forest and headed for home. Strangely, there were no traces of returning back to the forest. Andreas searched around the property, looking for any sign of the mysterious footprints, but there was none. Alarmed that a potentially dangerous intruder could be hiding in his house, Andreas conducted a thorough search of the house, and even the barn and tool room, but found no more traces and no sign of an intruder. That same night, Andreas was awakened by strange and inexplicable noises coming from the attic. Remembering what the maid had said about ghosts and the noises of the attic, she looked there as well, but found no one hiding there. Convinced that there was no one and still a little nervous, Andreas went to bed only to wake up the next morning and find a newspaper on his porch that no one in the family recognized. Not long after that, on March 30, 1922, a set of house keys mysteriously disappeared and could not be found anywhere. In his search for the keys, Andreas found the disturbing discovery of scratches on the lock of the tool room, as if someone had tried to open it. On May 31, 1922, in the midst of all these strange events, and a day after the discovery of the scratches on the lock and the disappearance of the keys, a new maid with the name of Maria Baumgartner came to the house to replace I had fled in a state of panic 6 months earlier. Mary's first day at work would turn out to be her last day, and it would also be the last day someone saw the Grubers alive. On April 4, 1922, the people of the city began to worry about the Grubers. No one had them in days, and the older grandson, Casilia, had not shown up at the school. Also, none of them had gone to church, and the Grubers' mail had been accumulating in the post office. Victoria, in particular, had never missed church because of her high position as a member of the choir. Some of the villagers decided to go to their property and check what was happening. When arriving at the farm, the calls of the group of search were not answered. A preliminary look at the outside of the farm gave no sign of the family, and the whole place had a strangely quiet atmosphere. They decided to inspect the inside of the barn, and when they opened the door they found a macabre spectacle. There in a pool of blood were the bodies of Andreas, his wife, his daughter Victoria, and the older granddaughter, Kazilia. Curiously, their bodies had been carefully stacked one on top of the other and covered with hay. The horrified search team proceeded frantically to search the other members of the family and found them inside the house. The youngest grandson, Joseph, was found dead in his crib in his mother's room, and the maid, Maria, was also found dead in his room in bed. Both had also bled profusely and lay on puddles of clotted blood. In all, 6 people, the 5 members of the Gruber family plus a maid, had been brutally murdered in cold blood. The townspeople immediately called the police, and in a matter of hours the investigators of the Munich Police Department had arrived on the scene. Preliminary autopsies performed on the bodies showed that all the victims had been killed with blows to the head caused by a pickaxe. Victoria's body also showed signs of strangulation, but it is not believed to be the cause of death. The author, it was assumed, was very familiar with the use of the beak, since all the wounds had been accurate, only one decisive blow to the head on each corpse. All the victims, except one, are believed to have died instantly, all except Kazilia, who showed evidence of having survived several hours after being severely wounded. Strands of her hair had been torn from her head for unknown reasons. Most of the victims were dressed in bedding, except Victoria and Kazilia, who were dressed in civilian clothes. This, plus the fact that Maria and Joseph had died in bed, suggested that the murders had occurred at night, before bedtime. A crime scene investigation led the police to conclude that someone had lured Andreas Gruber, his wife, and their daughter Victoria into the barn one by one to dispatch them with the pickaxe, after which the murderer had entered in the house to finish with Joseph and the maid while they lay in their beds. It was believed that Victoria and Kazilia had probably been the first to be attacked, since they had not dressed to go to sleep, when they had gone to investigate what had attracted them to the barn. One detail that the police observed was that all the corpses had been treated in some way. The bodies stacked in the barn had been covered in hay, the servant's body had been covered with sheets, and Joseph's body had been covered with one of his mother's skirts. If until now, the analysis of the bodies was fearsome, some very unusual findings were presented. The date of death was determined to be Friday, March 31, 1922, but after questioning the neighbors of the estate, this turned out to be quite strange. The witnesses stated that they had seen smoke coming out of the chimney of the farm all weekend, suggesting that someone had been in the house. The house also had evidence that someone had recently eaten there, and one of the beds appeared to have been used shortly before the bodies had been discovered. In addition, it was found that all the livestock and animals were well fed and had eaten recently, which was a rare finding since all those who normally cared for them had been dead for almost a week. In fact, none of the animals on the farm had been damaged in any way. The dog, which was found barking in the barn, had been patiently bound by the one who had killed the family and was beaten but otherwise healthy. This information had left the investigators quite perplexed, since it implied that whoever had killed the family stayed alive in the house for several days and fed the cattle before fleeing the scene. Why would someone do that? Nobody knew. The bewildered police were looking for a reason, but they found more mysteries. At first it was believed that the reason must have been pure and simple theft. After all, the Grubers were a very wealthy family and it was not uncommon to find vagrants and thieves in the area. However, even if some money was missing, a significant amount of gold coins and valuable jewelry had not been stolen. Surely a thief who had spent days on the farm after the murders would have discovered these valuables. Interestingly, it was found that Victoria had emptied his bank account a few weeks before and gave a 700 gold mark donation to his church, but the rest of the money was missing. It is not known if this had any connection to the murders, so it remained merely a strange detail. Later, the police began to suspect that the murders had been a crime of passion. Suspicions fell on a man by the name of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had been a suitor for Victoria. Victoria had always claimed that Joseph was the son of Schlittenbauer, although everyone in town thought that Joseph had been the result of an incestuous relationship between Andreas Gruber and Victoria. It was believed that Schlittenbauer might have lashed out in a fit of jealousy. It could also have been to escape the alimony payments, since it was later learned that Victoria had been about to sue Schlittenbauer for this right before the murders. Schlittenbauer had remarried and had another child at that time, but died unfortunately at an early age, and having to pay alimony for a child who could not even be sure it was his, when his own son had died, it could have been a trigger for violence. Other strange little details also seemed to point to the participation of Schlittenbauer. In the first place, he was one of the members of the first search group, who had gone to the farm to look for the Grubers. While he was there, it was reported that the dog tied up in the barn had taken a particular dislike to Schlittenbauer, and had barked profusely all the time he had been there. In addition, a witness said later that Schlittenbauer had seemed unperturbed by the sight of the bloody bodies, and was able to move the bodies in the barn without showing any sign of disgust. When asked why he was moving the bodies before the police arrived, he said he was looking for his son. Beyond an incredible calm before those deaths and violence, Schlittenbauer also demonstrated a knowledge of the farm, and was able to move around the property effortlessly, as if he had spent a lot of time there. All this undoubtedly attracted attention, and Schlittenbauer was questioned extensively by the police, but in the end they simply did not have enough concrete evidence to relate it to the crime, and he was never arrested for it. In fact, to date no one has been arrested for it. Regardless of who actually committed the murders, there are many other unexplained features of the case. Why would the author hide on the farm for so long before making his move? Surely the traces and noises in the attic must have been those of the killer, but these events happened long before the murders took place. If the original maid, who resigned out of fear, had listened to the murderer, then that would mean that the culprit would have been hiding in the property for a total of 6 months. Besides, why would the killer stay almost a week after the murders, and even feed the cattle? What purpose did he pursue? Nobody knows. The corpses of the 6 victims were finally buried in a cemetery in Weidhofen, without the head, since they had been sent to Munich for an analysis and had never been returned. The skulls are believed to have been lost at some point during the chaos of World War II, and nobody is really sure of what happened to them, which is a mystery in itself. The 6 decapitated bodies are buried next to a monument. The investigation of the Hinterkaifeck killings ultimately continued for years, with more than 100 suspects questioned, without the police being closer to solving the mystery, and the case has become one of Germany's most enduring unsolved mysteries. To this day, not a single suspect has ever been arrested for the crimes. The police became so desperate that they even hired clairvoyants to handle the skulls of the murder victims, without any effect. Over the years, the mysterious murders have become a fertile ground for amateur detectives to debate and also collect the case in their search for answers, as well as similar debates on the case of Jack the Ripper. Many theories near the paranormal have been proposed to try to get a light on the mystery. One idea was that Victoria's ex-husband, Carl Gabriel, carried out the murders. Although Gabriel had allegedly died in the trenches of World War I, his body had never actually been found and had never received an appropriate burial, so it is speculated that he may have returned for his wife. Upon learning of Victoria's incestuous relationship with his father and his relationship with Schlittenbauer, it could have ended in a crime of passion. This theory was fueled by the reports of 2 people who claimed to have met a Russian soldier after the Second World War who had claimed to be the Hinterkaifeck killer. It has been speculated that he originally faked his death to be free of his wife, but that he had changed his mind and returned only to find that his wife had another relationship. Others have pointed out the apparently paranormal elements of the case, such as the ghosts reported by the original maid on the farm, as well as the strange noises heard by Gruber himself, the mysterious newspaper, and the unexplained footprints in the snow. In light of these data, there are those who think that the culprit was not a man at all, but rather a kind of vengeful supernatural force that had set his sights on the family. It is a disconcerting case that raises so many questions and inexplicable mysteries, and to date it is no closer to being solved than it was in 1922. For its part, the Munich Police Department has sometimes reopened the case. He did this in 1996 and again in 2007, but both times he found nothing but dead ends. Police have said that the case is likely never to be resolved, since so many years have passed, evidence is scarce or has been lost in recent years, witnesses and suspects have died, and due to the investigative techniques of those days that were quite primitive, resulting in incomplete records and poorly catalogued evidence. That does not stop fans from discussing, debating, and discussing the killings, and it is likely to continue for many years. In Germany, the case of the Hinterkaifeck murders has become a legend, and is the subject of several books and films. The farm itself is a thing of the past, having been demolished in 1923 by villagers dissatisfied with having such a monument to death and horror still standing in the vicinity. Everything that is there now is a monument, the memories and the ghosts of those events that impregnated the silent trees. It seems to be a very real possibility that those trees will remain the only ones to know what really happened there.